Hey everybody, Shannon Scott coming to you from Cumberland Island, Georgia. And when you are a true taphophile, no adventure is too small or too big when it comes to finding old cemeteries. And what I mean by that is you're willing to take a 45-minute boat ride, get up at 5:30 in the morning to make sure you catch that ferry, just so you can come see an old cemetery sitting here on Cumberland Island, Georgia. And just for reference, this is, modern reference. This is where John F. Kennedy Jr. And his wife Caroline, right? They were married here at the Gravefield Inn estate. But nonetheless, this cemetery has been home and is home to some very famous Americans. One of them was Robert E. Lee's father, the Revolutionary War hero. Also Robert E. Lee, but he was called Lightfoot Horse Harry Lee, I believe, because I guess he was just great on a horse. I don't know. I don't remember a whole lot about him. But anyway, he was buried here for about 100 years, and then his remains were taken back to Virginia from this exquisite paradise. I mean, I can't imagine being buried in a lovelier place. But in part, I'm here to talk about Nathaniel Greene and Caty Littlefield Greene. Now, Caty Littlefield Greene's box tomb is this one you see here in the foreground. So, it's basically like an old communion table / Last Supper table meets, sarcophagus of the elite. But yeah, she's buried underground. Maybe in Europe they would have had somewhat of the skeletal remains, casket above ground, but here all underground. I like to talk about Caty Littlefield Greene because when she and her husband, Nathaniel Greene, retired to Savannah after the American Revolutionary War, they're pretty much penniless, as her husband spent most of his money, outfitting his soldiers and, of course, feeding them. And they opened up a little, I shouldn't say little, but an orphanage on the Savannah River. And by the way, tragically, they lost their son in a drowning there. 1804, I think. That would have been after Nathaniel died, but George Washington Greene, their son, actually drowned in the Savannah River. Another view here on the lovely cemetery. But nonetheless, when Nathaniel Greene died of a heat stroke, 1786, if I'm correct, and he was visiting his neighbor's plantation, Mad Anthony Wayne, who of course was one of the great heroes of the American Revolution. Mad Anthony Wayne and Savannah's Noble Wimberley Jones used to raid British camps at night, stealing food and supplies for Washington's men. And, of course, Mad Anthony Wayne, one of his sailors once said, "He's mad, he is, he's mad." So Mad Anthony Wayne. But nonetheless, Nathaniel Greene forgot his hat, and while inspecting the cotton fields or rice fields with Mad Anthony Wayne, he suffered a heat stroke. He died in the upstairs bedroom of Mad Anthony Wayne's house. But ultimately, Caty Littlefield Greene, buried here again on the far left in that box tomb next to the other tabletop grave. Notice that. That's a true communion table idea. But Nathaniel Greene's wife, Caty, was left to her own devices. And in part, I like to talk about this because she was one of the most independent, enterprising, innovative women there ever was. And if you're just dying to read a good book about maybe a true feminist, in the classical feminist sense, Caty Littlefield Greene, or Caty Littlefield Greene is the title of that book. I can't remember the author all of a sudden, but it's got a bright yellow cover. There's no mistaking. It's about the only book I think it's ever been really written about her. I could be wrong, but it's a dandy. I think it's because it really talks scandal. It talks romance, possibly a relationship she had or a fling with George Washington himself when he came to visit Savannah. But anyway, she's running this orphanage at the Mulberry Grove Plantation on the Savannah River all by herself after her husband's death. And basically she put an ad in a newspaper looking for a schoolmaster or an instructor to come help her run the orphanage. And a guy named Eli Whitney applied for that job and position. And he takes a ship, I believe, from Boston all the way down to Savannah, Georgia. There was a terrible, terrible storm, and he was not really a seaworthy guy, and he was terribly sick, so he was just glad to get here. During the stay of the orphanage, running the orphanage, the young inventor was beginning to tinker with what became known as the cotton gin. And apparently he was frustrated with the machinery. And so one night at dinner, expressing as much to Caty Littlefield Greene, she said, "Well, let me take a look at this, contraption you're working on." And so he goes up to his bedroom upstairs. He brings the cotton gin down to the dinner table, and he basically was showing the operation as he turned the hand-cranked manual cotton gin, kind of the miniature version of what would become a larger version. But the two spindles were not exactly strewing enough cotton seeds from the cotton itself, and this was very frustrating to Eli Whitney. And Caty Littlefield Greene had a light bulb that went off very distinctly, and she said, "Ah, that's but a thing." So she went up to her own bedroom, to her vanity. She grabbed a hairbrush and came down, and then put the hairbrush against part of the spindle mechanic, and basically instructed Eli Whitney to, begin turning the crank again. And at that moment, the exact or precise or most effective amount of seeds were being pulled from the cotton. And of course, this begins a business relationship. A lot of people don't realize this, just because the way we've been kind of educated, I think in a dumbed down way, is that Caty Littlefield Greene was 50% of that invention. She not only finished or completed the invention as far as, the actual engineering with that sort of moment between the two of them in the house there, but she became 50% owner of the invention. Now, they decided they need to have or to hold a party for potential investors in the cotton gin itself, and they held that at the Mulberry Grove Plantation, I believe 1793, there about 1794, and they hosted a bunch of potential investors and just other social bigwigs from Savannah, wherever else. And one of the lesser known parts about how, or aspects of how, the cotton gin was stolen from Eli Whitney is that there were about 7 men who dressed up as women and portrayed themselves as women at the party. And so kind of an early drag queen moment in Savannah, Georgia. But, I mean, they must have been outstanding or stood out in some way. There's no way they could have just gotten away with that blindly, but maybe they were that good, who knows. But anyway, while the party was going on in the house, these men dressed as women actually snuck out to the warehouse or the machinery shop where Whitney had the finished version, or as he had made it anyway. And they essentially stole it in the thick of the night and ran off with it. And the rest is kind of history. A lot of people know that he made no real money. In fact, when he died, not long after that sad evening, Caty Littlefield Greene spent the rest of her life going from state to state and suing each state for patent infringement. And I don't think she ever won a case, but she basically was very, had a lot of moxie and was determined that, let's say, the rightful dues be paid to her and maybe Eli Whitney's family. But in the end result, I don't think she won any of those cases. Now, as time went on for Caty Littlefield Greene, she was basically destitute, and Americans were really saddened that the wife of the patriot who had given so much to the American Revolutionary War cause was destitute, and this disturbed a lot of the other founding fathers, but a lot of those guys were also struggling because of their investments in the war itself. However, when the U.S. Treasury Department was created, Alexander Hamilton, I believe the first check written out of the U.S. Treasury Department by Alexander Hamilton was a $25,000 check to Caty Greene, and then some years later, he wrote her a second check for $25,000 so that she could live out her life in, a comfortable way. And Alexander Hamilton said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, that the single most significant act of his career as the Secretary of Treasury was being able to repay Caty Greene, and in that sense, the memory of Nathaniel Greene. So what a tribute, what an honor. And Caty Greene buried right here on Cumberland Island, Georgia, which is just such an exquisite place. If you've never visited this place, you have to make a trip here and check out this island. You can rent some bikes and just ride up and down the island. But here we see kind of the placard here with all the namings, and we see Caty Littlefield Greene. Hey, we almost have a similar birthday. She was born April 20. Oh, sorry, that's not hers. Sorry, my bad. She was born February 17th, 1755, and died September 2nd, 1814. And laid to rest here a long way from her birthplace of Block Island, Rhode Island. But yeah, she started her life as a New Englander daughter, and I think because, Her soul was in the South. This is where it all ended for Caty Littlefield Greene. But gang, this is Shannon Scott, the Bard of Bonaventure, the terrific Taphophile, the storyist of many things in Savannah, Georgia, other places, coming to you live in a way from Cumberland Island, Georgia. I hope you enjoyed that expose. And of course, you can find me at bonaventurecemetery.com, shannonscott.com. And remember, if you're determined to take my tour, I do private tours. That's one way you can really secure me in Bonaventure and other cemeteries in Savannah. And remember, when you're searching out there, it's Bonaventure Cemetery Journeys, not tours, but Bonaventure Cemetery Journeys. And we're out in Bonaventure pretty much daily and of course, when I'm off, and doing things like this, I have great storytellers in my steed. So yeah, check us out, bonaventurecemetery.com, shannonscott.com. And it's been a real honor storying you today, and hope to story you live and in person again soon. So thanks for watching.